Hello, my name is Dan and I make competitive Warhammer 40k content. Today we're going to be talking a lot about probability in Warhammer 40k. I think one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of new players have when they come into the competitive scene is they vastly overestimate the capabilities of their units, and they also underestimate some of the effects that buffs have on the game. Many people take low probability actions and then end up losing, and they blame the dice when in reality they were setting themselves up to fail in the beginning. And so what I'd like to do is talk about those probabilities, how you can calculate them, but also how different buffs and modifiers affect them. So today we're going to be talking about a few things. The first is the importance of buffs and kind of some effects that those have. We'll also go into multiplicative probability and how that can affect the consistency of kind of your rolls over the course of a game. And then we're going to use some of the takeaways in order to understand how we can be more efficient with our attacks, or rather go for specific effects on the battlefield. So all the calculations you see that I do in this entire video are all done with Ghost Lords 40k. It's a website that you can easily find online. I'll put a description in the link below. And it says 8th edition, but it's all the same D6s, so you can easily use this calculator in order to get the expected value of your attacks. So what you can do is you can put in a series of parameters for your attack, a series of parameters for your defender, and then understand what the expected value of the damage you're going to do is. But we already know from our beginner's dice math video that the expected value of an attack only happens roughly 50% of the time. And so it's actually not very good to base your entire game plan on 50% dice rolls because, as you'll find out soon enough, you string a bunch of those chances together and it becomes very, very unlikely to actually happen. The other thing I really like about this calculator is you can figure out what the percentage chance that you do a minimum value of damage. So in other words, you take a unit, you shoot, the expected damage might be, 5 damage. However, it may be a 90% chance that you do at least 2 damage, and that can be really good to understand your ability to kill certain units. I think using that calculation is very important because, like we said before, you really don't want to base your gameplay on what's going to happen 50% of the time. Otherwise, you're going to be losing a lot of your games. So for a bunch of these examples, I'm going to be using Terminators with a bunch of buffs on them. Part of that is because I play Thousand Sons and I really like Terminators, but also because they have a massive amount of buffs on them, and I think it kind of drives the point home in terms of the effects of buffs. So we're going to be looking at, in this example, is 10 Terminators shooting at a knight. So without buffs, we're just 3s to hit, 6s to wound, and we have a -2 AP against their 3+ save. If we do their 40 shots outright, you can see that we do about 3 damage to the knight, and that is not very much for a 450 point unit. Now I want to imagine we use a bunch of different buffs that come from psychic powers and stratagems on these Terminators. We have a stratagem that allows each bolter to shoot an additional time. That's a stratagem. We have a psychic power that gives +1 to hit. We can be within 6 inches of a HQ like Aramon to get rerolls 1s to hit. We can get +1 to wound with another strat, and we can also get +1 strength from an Infernal Master who does kind of the Thousand Sons version of a litany, which is, 3+ in the command phase to get +1 strength. And now if we look at this example, we can see that we're 2s to hit with rerolls on 1s, we're 4s to wound, and still at that -2 AP with 50 bolter shots. How much damage do you think we do to that knight now? Well, actually, it's almost 16 points of damage. That means with all those buffs, our Thousand Sons Terminators actually do almost 5.5 times more damage to knight equivalents. Now, I realize that example is kind of cherry-picked, so let's do something a little more common, like a Primaris equivalent. We're talking, toughness 4, 3+ save, 2 wounds apiece. Well, if we look at how much damage those Bolter Thousand Sons do again, we'll see that they do about 27 points of damage to a unit of Primaris Marines, or Primaris Marines equivalents. And when we compare that to how much damage they would do without any of those buffs, you can see that they do 3 times as much damage. And this happens because buffs are multiplicative because of the D6 system in 40k. I won't derive that again because, like I said, we did that in our beginner dice math video, but all of those buffs are multiplied in their effects over the course of an actual engagement. And what that means is that you do more damage if you put all your buffs on one unit as opposed to putting buffs on smaller units. Additionally, this means that your buffs do more damage when they're on max-sized units because that buff is being applied to more attacks. Basically, a 10-man unit of Terminators, it'll affect 10 Terminators, whereas if you put these buffs on a 5-man unit of Terminators, it only happens on 5 of them. This is why many buffs are getting scaled in their cost based on the unit size you have. However, these Thousand Suns ones specifically are not. And as you can see, these units get much more effective when you put buffs on them. But we can also look how buffs affect the defense of our units as well. This time I want you to imagine a Redemptor Dreadnought shooting at a unit of our Terminators. Now, that Redemptor hits on a 3+, wounds on a 2+, and he's overcharging, right? So these are 3 damage weapons, going against essentially the 5+ invulnerable save of Thousand Suns Terminators. Now, this is ignoring blast just for the sake of it, because the calculator doesn't have that, but the amount of Terminators killed is going to be 1.3 Terminators. Now, the Terminators also have a wide variety of defensive buffs we can put on them. We have a Psychic Power that gives -1 to hit for all attacks. We have a Psychic Power that gives them a 4+ invulnerable, and we have a stratagem that makes all incoming shooting damage be -1 damage. So now if we imagine the Redemptor shooting those Terminators again, what do you think the expected damage is? Well, it ends up being about 0.17 Terminators killed. Now, of course, in a real game, the Redemptor is going to have some buffs on it, and Blast would have a little bit of an effect as well, but the ratio is generally going to be the same. So we're seeing that these buffs essentially make the Terminators 7.5 times more survivable to damage 3 plasma. And instead, if that Redemptor was actually autocannons, which are, those 2 damage weapons, it would actually make them 9 times as more survivable. So I know what you may be thinking. Well, if they do 7.5 times as much damage and they're 9 times as survivable, do the buffs make Terminators 56 or something times more effective? And the answer is no, that's not how it works, but that's a whole different topic. So I want to show you guys something. So one of my friends actually makes carrying cases for Warhammer 40k models. These are called Magos cases, and he sent me some that I could show you guys. I actually use these to carry my army around as well. He's a small business owner, and I want to support him as well as share with you guys a kind of a neat thing he makes. So what these are is essentially a old ammo case that is drilled into with these metal plates. So what you can do is magnetize your models and then put them in here to carry your models around. I really like it because one of the issues with foam is that not only do you have to use, different pieces of foam depending on what your models look like, but it can also be really cumbersome to take them out and everything like that. So you can see these models I actually have magnetized in. I can shake these around, I can turn them upside down, and my Thousand Suns models don't ever actually come out. Even this Forge Fiend, which I spend many, many hours on, is stuck right on there and very easy to carry around. So I use this for all my 40k carrying needs, and I highly recommend it. If I didn't trust this product, I would not be doing this with the models I've spent, dozens and dozens of hours painting. And once more, they're just chilling there on the case. If that isn't a good ad, I don't know what is. One of the things I really like about this case is it has a piece of metal on the side, and that means you can actually put much larger models, like something like Magnus. You can actually put him inside this on his side against that metal plate. So I can fit my entire 2,000 point Thousand Suns army. It's way cheaper than the comparable foam cases. You don't have to buy individual pieces of foam. It's much more sturdy, and it's easier to move your models in and out. You can get these customized. You can get different things like, Velcro put on them. They're modular. And I think, if I was going to be moving my models around, I'd want something like this for storage too. So I'll put an Etsy link below for my friend who has this business. And please, that's one way you can support the channel is by, getting some of these carrying cases, or you can support me on Patreon as well. Once we get to 10,000 subscribers, I think I'll be able to get GW to sponsor me, or maybe even Manscaped. We can only be so lucky. Okay, now back to the video. So what's the takeaway from that? Well, buffs are incredibly important in this game, and it can be a little frustrating because if you're a new player and you look at the data sheet from a Terminator, you're like, oh, these guys shoot 4 times, strength 4 shots, 3+ a hit, that's not a big deal. But you would have no idea about the actual defensive and offensive power of a Terminator You wouldn't even know that these Terminators are OBSEC, or that when they move, they ignore the penalty for shooting heavy weapons. You would have no idea about all the psychic buffs you can layer, or the defensive buffs you can layer on Terminators. So that's my little side complaint about how hard it is for a new player to understand what units do, because datasheets seem to put, less than half of the actual data that goes into what a unit actually does. But that's a complaint for a different video as well. But I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Dan, each of those buffs, save for a few of those stratagems, right, require you to get some, successful roll-off. That litany that the Infernal Master does, I use litany, but it's not actually called that, just a Space Marine term, is, a 3+ on a single D6 at the beginning of your command phase. So even that is only a 2/3 chance of being successful. And then when you look at the chance to cast all those spells, Glamour of Tzeentch on a 6+, Weaver of Fates on a 5+, Presage on a 7+, and then Sorcerer's Facade, that is the Cult of Duplicity specific one that allows you to teleport a Terminator, across the map, or any Thousand Suns unit. Each of those psychic spells also has to go off. And if we look at those probabilities, and once again, we can multiply two different probabilities to get what the chance is that they both end up occurring. We can see that getting all 4 buffs off and teleporting that unit of Terminators, across the map only happens 9.6% of the time. And you guys are thinking, checkmate, Dan, that is a very inconsistent strategy. I would never bank my entire game plan on a less than 10% chance of actually being successful. But just like how we talked about the Terminators, how you don't really know what they do unless you read the entire Thousand Suns Codex, you don't really know the consistency of all these buffs unless you also read the entire Thousand Suns Codex. So what are the odds that those buffs actually happen? Well, we have a stratagem for 1 CP that we can retroactively automatically pass the Infernal Master's Litany. As Thousand Suns, we also get +1 to cast on all our spells. If we use someone like Ahriman, he can reroll every single failed cast roll, and we can use our Cabal points to automatically pass one spell, as well as use a few other points to give ourselves a bonus to the psychic test that we take for some of our spells. And so when we understand all those different buffs we can give to ourselves, and all the different ways we can make those buffs more effective and more consistent, now we can see that to get all 4 of those buffs off and still teleport our Terminators across the map is actually a 93% chance of success. And that is something I would base my entire gameplay on. So that means with all of the effects we made to make our buffs more consistent and all the different, special rules we had, we made our buffs 9.7, rounded roughly, times more consistent and more likely to happen than if we didn't use any of those other ways to make them more consistent. And we can do that once more. 93% to the 5th power gives us a roughly 70% chance that in every single game of a 5-round tournament, I will get this exact series of buffs off on my Terminators. And that is something I will base my entire tournament strategy around. So in fact, the Thousand Suns buffs are not only incredibly powerful, but they're also very consistent, and they can take what is, a pretty boring body, a Terminator with some bolter shots, and we can turn that Thousand Suns Terminator unit, which by itself on its datasheet looks pretty unimpressive, to being a really strong killing machine and also quite durable. So it's rare in 40k that we want to be as efficient as possible with our shooting and attacks. Generally, you want to do whatever scores you the most points, but I do think there is some kind of fun and some interesting things we can look at about how to be more efficient with our shooting, even if it isn't, necessarily always the right way to score more points, because at the end of the day, it's a game, we're here to have fun. Sometimes the kind of things we look at aren't necessarily incredibly practical, but they're fun to look at, and I like thinking about them. So now let's imagine, once again, these Terminators shooting at 40 different Imperial Guard units. We also understand that there's a chance that we will overkill, right? Let's say I shoot all of my Terminators at a 10-man unit of Imperial Guard. We all kind of understand that that's probably overkill. I'm probably going to do something like 26, 27 points of damage to those Imperial Guard units. If they only have 10 wounds, that's kind of a waste of shots, right? Now, of course, like I said, if they're the one unit you need to kill to get off an objective, then yeah, go for it. Overkill them. Be, entirely sure that you're going to kill them. But sometimes we want to be more efficient. And if nothing else, we should at least understand what the drawback is and benefit of splitting our fire is. So instead, let's take these 40 shots from our Terminators, and let's instead do 10 shots at each 10-man unit of Imperial Guard. So we'll use all the same buffs we talked about before, but we're just not going to use that, extra 10 bolter fires because it just makes the math easier here. You'll see that you have about a 50% chance to kill 7 models. So over the course of doing that 4 different times, you'll kill about 27 or 28 models. Whereas we can also look at the chance to do at least 10 wounds or more ends up being only about 2% chance. So we have a very low percent chance that we overkill our unit, and a very low percent chance that we entirely wipe the squad out, but you can see we kind of maximize our ability to do a little bit of damage to each of the units. Now instead, if we split our fire differently and do 20 shots at 2 different units of 10 mans and don't shoot the other 2 10 mans at all, we have a expected value of about 13 damage to each of those units we shoot at, which means we have a 96% chance of killing each of those units. But at that point, you only kill 20 models as opposed to the roughly 27 or 28 if you split your fire 10 at each unit. So you can see here, what do you want to go for? Do you want to go for the consistency of wiping out 2 entire units, or do you want to go for the points efficiency, kill as many models as you can by splitting your fire? And now that we've learned both about the effects of buffs and the effects of splitting our fire, we can kind of use this to better understand how we want to do target priority. Let's say your opponent is playing AdMech and they have 2 20-man units of, Skitarii Rangers that they can put a lot of buffs on. Well, you could decide to kill the entire 20-man unit and leave them with another 20-man unit, which they would still put all their buffs on and do an incredible amount of damage against you on. Or you can instead try to kill 10 at each unit, and that way, if they put all their buffs, it's only affecting 10 models instead of the 20 models that they would get if you, focused on 1 unit as opposed to dwindling down 2 units as much as you could. So if your opponent has the ability to put a bunch of buffs on 1 unit and kind of stack those all together, generally it's better to split your fire and kind of give them 2 half-sized units as opposed to a full-strength unit and a dead unit. Do we even really want 100% chance to kill units? Generally, if you have something like a 99-point-something% chance to kill a unit, you're probably overkilling it, and you could get more damage done in total and still reliably kill the unit you're going after if you split your fire. So let's imagine those Terminators, and they're trying to shoot at a unit of Blade Guard vets and a captain. Let's say your goal is to be able to kill a captain, but you can't shoot him because the 3 Blade Guard vets are there and they're able to use, Lookout Sir rule and prevent you from shooting at the captain. Now, Lookout Sir specifies that they need to have at least 3 models in one of those units. So if we're really trying to be able to shoot at the captain with a different, unit after our Terminators, we don't need to kill all 3 of those Blade Guard vets. In fact, we only need to kill 1. So if we shoot all our shots at those Blade Guard vets, we have a 21% chance of killing all 3, but a 97% chance of killing at least 1. And sometimes all we need is to kill 1. So don't look at the expected value and always look for what do you need or what's the percent chance to kill a unit. Look for what is the percent chance that you need to get the effect you want. Maybe you just need to destroy enough models so they can't use Lookout Sir. Maybe you need to shoot enough models off an objective that you can walk on with your own OBSEC models and immediately take the point over. So that's one of the things I really like about that Ghost Lord, website, is you can calculate the expected value, but also the percentage to do a minimum value of damage. Now, you're not going to do that in a game, but I do think it's worth looking at some, common defensive profiles you could be going against to get a better understanding of how much damage your units actually do. So what's good enough for a percentage? Because we already understand that if we have a 99.999 whatever percent chance of doing something, it's probably overkill and you're probably better off splitting your fire a little bit, at least in most cases. For me, I like to do about an 80% chance, and that's what I feel comfortable with. Now, I call this rule of thumb or heuristic, the 80% chance, the why Blood Angels are not good at charging out of Deep Strike. There's such a cool faction that I love playing. Jump pack troops coming out of Deep Strike, making charges, and they just can't consistently do it. And why is it that Blood Angels aren't good enough and you can't reliably get these charges off? And why almost nobody in the competitive scene actually puts their Blood Angels in Deep Strikes as a way to get charges off? Well, we know that a 2d6 charge on a 9 is a 28% chance. These are all going to be, rough numbers here, average them out. And about a 48% chance with a reroll. So the average person coming out of Deep Strike, even if you use a CP reroll, is less than 50% chance. So that's a pretty bad strategy. But Blood Angels get an additional 1 on their charge rolls. So that means they have a 42% chance with no reroll and a roughly 67% chance with a reroll. And 67 is, below 70%. That is a pretty rough percentage that I would base their gameplay on. Now, if you need a 7 on 2 dice, it's a 58% chance on 2 dice, or an 82% if you have a reroll. So units that can come out of Deep Strike with a +2 charge and a reroll, or if they're important enough to warrant using a CP for that reroll, is a strategy I would bank my game on. Anything like a 3d6 is also great, or coming d6 inches closer, kind of like things that some other factions can do. Or if there are Sisters of Battle or an Eldar who can actually change the dice values, those are more consistent, something that I would actually base a gameplay strategy on. And so when we look at the numbers and we wonder, why is it that coming out of Deep Strike for Blood Angels, as an example, seems to be so ineffective? And the answer is a 67% chance is simply too low to base your gameplay strategy around. So a couple takeaways for your next game. I would look to see how many buffs you can put on one unit and the effects it has on the offensive or defensive capability of that unit. Additionally, I would look in your next game to see, hey, what are the effects I'm trying to go after? Do I really want to just kill the entire unit dead, or do I want to get it to a certain point where I can take the objective with OBSEC units, that I can ignore the Lookout Sir rule because there aren't enough models there? Or are you looking at reducing their ability to benefit from their own buffs? These are all kind of just fun things to think about in your next game. And I would never build an army that has a key strategy that is less than 80% chance of actually going off. So I hope you liked today's math video, and I hope everyone here has a wonderful day. Thank you very much.